Welcome to A Healthy Bite. You're one nibble closer to a more satisfying way of life, a healthier you, and bite-sized bits of healthy motivation. Now let's dig in on the dish with Rebecca Huff.
On today's episode of A Healthy Bite, I have the honor of speaking with the author of Holistic Wealth, Keisha Blair. Keisha is a trained economist with extensive experience in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors, and she wrote a viral blog post after her husband passed away at a very young age of 34. And Keisha is here today to share a little bit about her book and some of the life lessons that help you find purpose, prosperity, and happiness. I appreciate you being on the show today. I'm looking forward to talking to you about financial health. But before we get started, can you tell my audience, which it's predominantly women, so we're going to focus on financial health for women. Mm-hmm. But can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your story?
Sure. So thanks for having me. It's great to be on the show. And so, yes, a few years ago, my husband passed away when I was 31. This was 8 weeks after I gave birth to my second child. And he died of a disease that was very, very rare. So we had no idea that he was sick. The doctors didn't detect it. It was only after an autopsy, which took another year, because experts, they had to gather like an international panel of experts to examine the case. It was that rare. And so it was after a year we found out what it was. And so I, at the time I was an economist myself, and I was very aware of the need for women, young women especially, to be very savvy about their finances and to take that very, very seriously. But when that happened to me, it all just became even clearer. And it just was just like an epiphany that even if you're young, it needs to be something that needs to be very top of mind. It needs to be something that is planned for, in terms of our finances or financial well-being. And so, just many lessons and many insights because of my experience, and so happy to share with other women based on that. And it's always a privilege, and I'm always very humbled to spread this message because it's so important.
I agree, it is. And so your book, Holistic Wealth, which I agree, the cover is very, very pretty. It's broken down into 4 sections, which are intentional life purpose, financial independence, physical and spiritual nourishment, goodwill, and strong relationships. I love that. And in the 4 different parts of your book are the 32 lessons. So how did this book come about?
Yeah, so after my husband died, I started on a path of writing, and I just had to get through just even getting my thoughts on paper and kind of putting down how it all evolved for me and how I was feeling. And so I wrote and wrote and wrote until one day I sat down and I was like, well, what lessons have I learned from this tragedy? And I ended up writing an article on Thrive Global called My Husband Died at Age 34. Here are 40 life lessons I learned from it. And I just thought, wow, I'll just write that and nothing will happen. But it became very popular. It was viral. And, an agent, because at the time I was writing and it had kind of formed, like a manuscript had formed out and in the shape of a memoir. And I still wanted to get this memoir published. And an agent said, you know what, put down that manuscript and write this book based on this article with the life lessons in it. And I was like, okay, it sounded, I know the article had resonated well with people. And so I thought, yeah, this could be a great format for a book. And so I started writing that. And that's how the book came about. And so it's 32 life lessons because we had to condense some down to from the 40 to the 32. And so that's why we have it broken down. And if you look at the article in comparison to the book, you'll see those 4 sections of the book there very clearly in terms of it's just better organized. And so it's been a real humbling experience for me to see that in the form of a book now, because these were exactly the kinds of things that got me through that tragedy. Just now put into this framework that's well organized and something useful for other people to use. And I mean, even if you haven't been through the loss of a spouse, there's so many lessons around how to organize yourself and how to be intentional about living well and planning your finances and relationships. And so I'm glad to be at this point where it can be shared in such a useful framework.
I loved it. I started reading it and I thought, okay, that definitely applies to me. Okay, this is a lesson I need to learn. And as I was going through, I felt like they all applied to me. So, like I said, I'm not a widow, but I found that every single lesson was something. And I think it's really just about living your life on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the theme I got from your book, is just to really be choosing the path you take, which is kind of ironic for me because I talk to my therapist about this a lot, is how I spent so much of my life just doing whatever happened next and not really planning anything, and then putting out a fire, and then one thing would lead to another, and I really had no rhyme or reason to what I was doing. And so if I'd had this book 20 years ago, I think my life would have been organized a lot differently and a lot better sooner.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved every single one. And I also loved that you gave me permission to knit in your hobbies section.
Yes.
Because I think knitting is such a soothing, meditative hobby. It just calms your mind. And sometimes, if you're stressed out, if you're a knitter and you think, I just need to knit. So what's your hobby that you have that makes you feel?
Yeah, writing for me, I'll be honest, just because it's one of the things I've just been doing a lot of in the last couple of years. Writing for me has been truly my hobby in terms of getting my thoughts down, and when I'm alone away from the kids and everyone else, that's what I tend to do most. I when I was on sabbatical, it was different, and I discussed that in the book too. It was more about nature walks and being out in nature, because I just felt like it was a call. Like I needed that, and it helped me get through that setback. And so at the time, if you had asked me this question, when I was I would have said that to you. And it was hiking, it was walking, it was being out in nature. And it's amazing how, your hobbies kind of go with what you're kind of going through in life. And it's kind of aligned with that, which is amazing, because we all need these hobbies at different times of our life to kind of get us through different situations. So it's, so yeah, I can see how with the knitting, that would have been for sure calming, for people who enjoy that. And it was great to include that in the book as well.
Yeah. So your writing, did it start out as journaling? Because I know you talk about journaling in your book as kind of a good thing to do. Did you start out writing for other people, or were you just writing for yourself?
So it started off as kind of a journal, and I was writing for myself. It was just like, this is what I'm feeling. Why is this happening? It was a jumble of a lot of my thoughts on paper. And, I said it in the article that went viral, that if I had known, I would have even been more intentional. If I had known about my desire to make this into a book at the time I started journaling my thoughts, I would have even been more intentional about capturing even more of my feelings as they were raw and vulnerable. And so I felt like I lost out on some of that. And even some of the things the kids would ask me, and which ended up in the book, you'll see in chapter 1, things that Alex, my son, would say, I would have even been more. And I completely agree with you when you say that if you had that book before, you'd have even been more intentional. You saw me nodding, because I feel the same way. And so when I wrote it, I wrote it from that perspective. It was just this perspective of, how can we be very intentional about our decisions, about moving forward in our lives, about living in our purpose, so that, whenever we look back, we won't have these regrets about our lives. And you mentioned putting out fires, and that's how I felt for a while too, especially after my husband died. It was just like the funeral and getting through the autopsy and explaining to family and friends. And I had no time to think about how I would move forward, what I would do. And it was only when I took that sabbatical that I had time to think about that, because I had the space I needed from everyone, from the work and everything, and to kind of set that framework in motion. And I think that's one of the gifts of actually, like us taking that pause to reflect.
Definitely. You talk about this in the section with the intentional life purpose, discovering the real you. How does one do that? Do you feel like you discovered yourself during this period of time?
Yeah, definitely. So I had, he had passed when I was 31, as I mentioned. At the time, I mentioned this in the book too, that I had just gotten into this executive program. And, for me, even before he passed, that was my life goal. I would become an executive and I would move up, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's amazing. And for so many of us, we have these goals, and I talk about goals with wisdom too, because for so many of us we do, and it's wrapped up in our careers and having financial wealth and these different things. And when I went on sabbatical and I had time to think, I thought, wow, I had those goals before he died, but I don't know if those are my goals anymore. I was now widowed with two young children, and I had to think about, as a single parent, how I would move forward. And so that goal now seemed a bit more like vanity in that context. It had really, struck me as, well, okay, I need to put self-care first now. I need to put my children's self-care first as well. And so, yeah, like it gave me the time to think about, really, what do you want to do? And I thought about his legacy, and I thought about what mine would be, and I knew it had to just transcend goals of just climbing the corporate ladder, or having a certain marker of success. It had to be something that I could be proud of, in terms of giving back and sharing, with other people, my experiences. So yeah, that's how I got more intentional about walking in my purpose. And it's so funny, because there's a quote in the book from Viktor Frankl about detecting your purpose. And that's kind of what happened to me while I was on sabbatical. I kind of detected it, because here's this very bizarre incident that happened, this very bizarre tragedy that nobody could comprehend. Most doctors won't ever see that disease in their lifetime, only in textbooks. And I thought, wow, this happened to my family. And it really struck me as, there's a reason for this. And I know there are people out there thinking, there's something happening in my life. Is there a reason for this? Or does this mean something? And it does. And I think if we take the time to really think through it and think about the lessons we're learning as we're going through it, then it's easier to kind of detect your purpose rather than invent it. I think that was the quote from Viktor Frankl in the book, because a lot of us go, we move through life thinking that we're inventing it, and we're not. We're really not inventing it. We're detecting it based on experiences that are happening to us throughout life, and we have no control sometimes over what happens. So even though we can make goals, and we should, and even though we can, do things to kind of nudge us in a certain direction, it's all about detecting based on what's happening around you. And so that's kind of the epiphany I got when I was on sabbatical. It was just like, yeah, this is obviously now a part of my life, a big part. This has now defined me in a way that nothing else can. How do I use that to help others? And how do I use it? And in what format do I share, and how? And so I had to work through all of that, even as I was trying to reconstruct a life and trying to reinvent myself, and trying to see how I'd move forward.
Yeah, I'm definitely still in the detective phase of figuring out my life. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think I did spend a lot of years trying to invent it, like you're saying. So that makes a lot of sense. And I really enjoyed that whole section of the book. And before we leave that section, can you talk to us a little bit about the law of abundance?
Sure. So when I wrote out the different principles and different laws in the book that corresponded with like the four different areas in the book, the four different sections.
Mhm.
The law of abundance was one of the very first ones that came to me, and it came to me in so many different areas. It's unbelievable because um, when we talk about giving back, as we're talking about, and financial wealth, I think about the law of abundance a lot, as well as the law of reciprocity, because I feel like, a lot of us think about money and we think about it in scarcity terms. When you think about money, the first thing that comes to your mind is, whoa, the first thing that comes to mind is that I have a ton of this. It's great. It's awesome. It's always, wow, how can I get more? I don't have enough. And so when I think about the law of abundance, I think about mindset and changing our mindset to thinking, yes, I don't have enough now, but how can I enable myself to have more, um, and to be resilient financially and resourceful financially? So I talk about the two R's a lot in terms of money, because I see money through a different lens now. I see it as enabling financial resilience, enabling financial resourcefulness, and especially because of what I've been through. And so when we think about abundance, like I write in the book too, not necessarily just thinking about, flashy wealth and this type of thing, but abundance in terms of having enough to allow us to be financially resilient and financially resourceful. So it's a very important law in the book, and it touches on a lot of different things like giving back, because I feel like when you give, you receive, and that's also wrapped up in the law of reciprocity. And I think about abundance not only in terms of having, flashy cars and a big house, but I think about it in terms of enabling not only individual resilience, but as a society. Like, how can we all enable, ourselves to bounce back from setbacks? And this is how you bounce back from setbacks: is you enable yourself to be financially resilient and financially resourceful. And I talk about having a financial identity in the book as well. And a lot of that is wrapped up in that, because women, I find, and this happened to me, even though I was a trained economist, I am, that we transition into adulthood not having a keen sense of our financial identities, because, we get married and we are influenced by our spouses. We're influenced too by our parents growing up. And so we take on their financial identities more than we even realize. And it affects how we spend, how we save, and how we invest. But we're not thinking about, what do I really want? And how do I want this money to serve me in a way that makes me more resourceful and resilient? And that's something I want women to think about, because I did a lot of thinking about that after my husband died. And very important, so that we can bounce back from setbacks and live that intentionally life, that life that we want to live. So when I think about abundance, I think about all of that wrapped up. And these are concepts that I'd love to explore more, like even beyond the book, because, like I feel like it needs a whole other book or topic to flesh out more about how women can develop their financial identities and really embrace that and feel confident in their spending and their saving habits and in their investment habits. Because I feel like once you take on that financial identity, it gives you that confidence to move forward. This isn't, what, my mom thinks I should do, or my friend, or my spouse. This is exactly who I want to be. And this is my money philosophy. This is what I want my financial life to look like.
Wow. There's so many things going through my mind. I hope that you do continue to write. I would love to see you elaborate more on some of the things that you brought up in your book. I love your style of writing and the ideas that you have, and just what you were saying just now about taking on spouse's financial identity or parents' financial identity. I can so, I mean, that's just, it blew my mind when you were saying it, because I can see that in my own life. I can
Mhm.
see I have adult daughters. So yeah, that's something I think that we do maybe without even really
Yeah.
realizing that we're doing it. And for myself, I didn't realize I was doing it until I had been doing it in a negative way for a while. And now I'm fixing it. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I think so. How do, say, a newly married young lady, how does she maintain or even establish her own financial identity rather than taking on that of her husband?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one thing I would say, and it's funny because I feel the same way you do, because it was after my husband died and I was alone now that I was like, wow. And this is how you can tell if you don't have your own financial identity. You keep thinking, what would he think if I were to buy this dress? What would he think if I were to buy this thing? Or what would he think about this investment? Maybe he wouldn't think it's a good idea. And then the guilt starts. And that's what happened to me. And I thought, wow, I need to stop doing that. And I need to be confident in my decisions. And I wanted that confidence, and I wanted that, happiness that came with me doing what I wanted to do with my own money. And so afterwards, that's when I thought through all of this. And so for a newly married couple or female who is just starting on that journey, because in the book I refer to this as the expansionary years. Those are your years when you're investing a lot of money in core assets that will probably define you and in financially, in terms of your net worth and things like that. I mean, it sounds bad, but that's what it is. These are assets that will define you until you retire, probably. And so think about your financial goals. In the book, I talk about having like a personal mission aligned with your values and all of that. Think about your financial goals and where you see yourself. From an early age, like I'll give you an example for me. Like I knew I wanted to invest. I knew I liked real estate. I didn't know how I'd be able to do this, or if that, would ever happen. But I always looked at houses and just like, wow, I wonder what it feels like to have a house that you can call an investment. And so other women listening might have that yearning for some other type of investment, or for a piece of farmland that they can develop, or for having a business. And we get these messages all the time, and I talk about that in the book. People might tell you, no, you can't do that, or you can't. But if you have your own financial identity, and you know that these are your goals and your dreams, so you think about your goals and your dreams, things that you've always longed for. And these things are investments, like core assets. When you think about like a business or real estate or some other form of investment, then that's one way that that yearning and that longing is yours, and it's uniquely yours. And before marriage, we all walk in with our goals and dreams. We all walk in with things that we want to achieve and how our life should unfold. But then sometimes during that relationship, things might not happen for whatever reason, and there are always people to say, nah, maybe not. Just, do this or do that. That might be safer for you. And so it might not be a spouse, it might be a friend, it might be somebody else. And so these are some of the things that you can think about to prompt you into thinking, yeah, you know what? I've always wanted to have this. And I've always wanted, I was never the type to buy lots of fancy clothes, but I was always the type to think about, wow, what would I want my net worth to be at age 35, 40, 45? And so when you think about your spending and your saving habits, you can easily map out kind of the things you like to splurge on versus the things you like to save on. And all of us are different and unique, and it's fine. And it's fine if you like to splurge on a certain thing, but just know that it needs to be balanced with being financially resourceful and resilient, because those are some of the things long term that will help you to bounce back from tragedy. So that's how I would think about it in terms of like a, somebody who's not yet married but is on the verge of and thinking about their financial identity. And you know what, it's so wrapped up in our goals too, because when I think about me, like I've always wanted to retire early, to do something. And that was me from the beginning, even before my husband died. And so if you know that, then it helps you to form your own financial identity, because then you'll know that you'll need to save and invest even more aggressive than the average person, because your goal is to retire early. And if that's your goal, you have to map out a path if you really want to achieve it. And then it becomes a part of your financial identity. Well, I'm investing more aggressively than the average person my age now, because I know I want to retire early. And so it becomes a part of your whole financial identity. And this is something I think we need to embrace, something that we need to give thought to, and to really sit down. I mean, even as a couple, and think, yeah, these are things I prefer to splurge on versus save on. These are things that as a couple, I think we need to have agreement on, in terms of what we'll save and what we'll splurge on, in terms of, what will make us more financially resourceful and financially resilient. Like, everything has to be a part of the puzzle, in terms of like life insurance and long-term
Right.
care. All of these things are things that when you talk about being financially resilient, those things enable that, because they help us to bounce back. If someone dies, somebody gets a critical illness, if somebody loses a job, or if we get a divorce, like, these are some of the things that we need to think about and kind of balance with our goals and our long-term needs. So that's kind of the gist of it. And a lot of that I know is also mentioned in the book. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, very important.
Yes, I agree. So let's talk a little bit about debt then. I know you said that when your husband passed away, thankfully you did not have a lot of debt. But what would you say to people who maybe do have a lot of debt, or even to single women with debt? Just debt, I guess, in general. But yeah, I mean, was that something that you intentionally just didn't have debt? You decided together that you weren't going to have a lot of debt, or was it just something that kind of happened?
Yeah, to be honest, like, I think I was just too young. Like, I really do think you accumulate, apart from student loans, I really think you accumulate more and I mean, I don't know if studies bear me out, but this is my personal experience, my personal thoughts, that I think you accumulate more when you're a bit older than in,
Uh-huh.
just off of 30. Like, I
Hmm.
I, I just don't think we had bought our first home, and yes, we had a mortgage, so we had that debt. But it was like a small town home. It wasn't big, it was really small. And so even the mortgage debt was negligible.
I mean, you
Uh,
were practically in your 20s still. I mean, 31
exactly.
isn't really in your 30s.
Exactly. Just off of my 20s. Exactly. And I didn't have student loans, because I didn't have for my undergrad and for my grad school, like, it was just paid for. So I didn't have student loan debt, and the mortgage debt was negligible. We were still young. We weren't big spenders. My husband was a CPA, and he was the type to kind of keep every receipt, like track every dollar, every dime, and which is one of the reasons why I even came up with this whole financial identity thing, because he was the type who was like a penny pincher. So I didn't have a lot, and that was a good influence from him. It really was. Um, but yeah, like, once he died, I started thinking about, what if I had that? And I know it would have been very easy to have that. It was just a matter of like age, being just young and just not having the student loans, which typically at that age is what burdens most of us at that time. It's the student loans. And we didn't have a big flashy wedding, so we didn't have any debt from our wedding. And we barely, so the kids weren't, that age where you start to spend lots of money, which is, I think, the age that my kids are now. So
Hmm.
yeah, where you start to spend more and more and more and more. And so I thought about debt a lot, because I thought, oh my gosh, this would have been crazy if I had to foot the bills for a funeral, because the funeral costs quite a bit. Like, we look at the average cost of a funeral online, it's way more. And everything that goes along with it, way more. And then I thought about, well, if I wanted to take time off from work, how would I do that with 2 young kids and have debt? What would I do? And so I focused on that. And that's why one whole chapter in the book is related to that. Because I think about women a lot who are in my shoes but have debt. And that's why, there are some interviews in the book with other women who are young and the strategies they've been using, and very aggressive in paying them down. And that's what I would advise as well. Just very aggressive some women take on side jobs and things like that. And I know if you're not able to do that, it's just good to dedicate even a little bit more than you're dedicating now to paying that down and getting that off, because that's one of the strategies that enables financial resilience and financial resourcefulness is getting out of debt and not having that, because then that becomes a setback in times of tragedy. Like if a job loss comes in, it's a setback. If loss of a family member, it's a setback. If a divorce comes in, it's a big, huge setback. And so I just would, advise women to look at what they're allocating to debt right now in terms of their repayments, and see if, that can be topped up in any way. In the book, I talk about your allocative efficiency. And that's what I'm talking about. I am talking about, like, we make purchases every day, and some purchases are needed, and there's some that we can absolutely cut back on. And, it all adds up. So even if it's that, I don't know, whatever that weak spot is that you have, look at that and see, can I dedicate this much more to paying that down? Because I think that will get you well on your way to achieving, financial well-being. And eliminating debt is just one of the ways of getting rid, because financial debt, like it's one of the big stressors in our lives. It's if not the most significant source of stress. So I think, whether or not, there's a setback or there's anything else happening, it's just a worthy goal to get rid of it as soon as possible. Yes. And so being aggressive about paying down debt is something that I definitely advise.
I do too. I think you have people in both camps when it comes to debt. I talk to my friends, and we talk about how our spouses feel about debt. And there's people who have debt. They're like, oh, everyone has debt, no big deal. And then there's people who's like, oh my gosh, we have debt. And it's funny too when you have two people that are married, and one is I don't want any debt, and the other one's like, everybody has debt. That's always interesting. But yeah, I agree. Getting rid of debt as quickly as possible, even if it means taking on side jobs, or just like I tell my daughters, try not to get debt in the first place. Just ask yourself, do you really need to buy this? Do you have to buy it on credit? I mean, because I can see, maybe cars or student loans, houses, but then just having a credit card for spending or traveling that you don't pay off is just, can I say, a little irresponsible. I mean, yeah, so I do think that part of our financial health is getting rid of that debt. Do you have any other suggestions for young women as far as maintaining or building, having a healthy financial life?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think looking at how much you're saving. And so I get this question a lot. I'm paying down debt. Should I save? How can I save when I'm paying down debt? Because everything is going to debt repayment. And I think that's one of the burdens that we all face is, how do I, shave off room for the saving? And I think the saving, even at the point of paying off debt, is very important, because for some of us, and this has to do with mortgages and student loans, big loans, it takes a while, and it's okay if it takes you a while. And I don't think that's something that we should beat up ourselves about. But what I think we need to do, because it takes a while, is to save as we're paying down debt. And I know it sounds like a contradiction to say, well, be aggressive about paying down debt and then save, find, extra to save. But I think it's still good to find the extra. So I think that's why having a budget is so important, and really finding, okay, how can I allocate to debt and still save a little, still invest a little, because I think they go hand in glove. I don't think we can be financially resilient or resourceful if we have no savings. And that's the thing. Like, I see a lot of financial advice that's being handed out, like even on the internet today, where they're like, no, just forget saving until you pay off debt. And I think to myself, okay, well, I'm picturing a young woman like myself at 31 who was widowed with 2 young kids. Let's say I was paying off debt as aggressively as I could, dedicating every dime. And that was well and good. And, like, I was doing the best I could for me. What if I'm left with no income, no husband, and I have no savings? That would be catastrophic. And so all the decisions and all the life lessons that are there in that book are influenced by that. And I think it's good when, like, their financial advisors out there, they're well educated, they're very experienced, but they haven't suffered the types of setbacks. And quite frankly, not some of them aren't women, and they're not shouldering some of the burdens that we women are shouldering. Because the thing about it is, and this is something I've talked about too, women tend to spend an outsized share of our salaries and paychecks on the household. And we tend to spend more. We tend to spend more when we have babies. We tend to spend more when we acquire a new home, just in fixing it up and doing all the things around the home. Or incomes, like it really gets spent there. And I want all women to think about, and this is why I talk about being intentional, just to think about where it's going and how you can put aside some to save, and think about resilience and resourcefulness. Like, have those 2 words in the back of your mind, and you'll kind of get instantly why it's necessary. Because it's funny, because like a lot of women will outlive their husbands. Like, I know it probably won't happen at my age, like at 31 when it happened to me, but a lot of us will outlive our spouses. And for a lot of us, we'll become the main breadwinner at some point in our lives or the other. And whether you have adult children or young children, women are taking care of grandchildren, or taking care of children and great grandchildren. We're going to be in that mode. I think we're going to be in that mode until we die, because that's just who we are too as individuals, right? So I think that saving at the same time as paying down debt is radically important. Like, it's not a proposition where it has to be like I'm going all out for my debt and I'm not putting anything aside if I have a job loss, because that's not going to help. And it's not going to help if we get an illness where we have to stop from work, because once that paycheck stops, then we're going to have something to kick in. And that's where the resourcefulness comes in. That's where, okay, what are the pot of funds that I have that can help me to kind of, go forward? And so and investing is a whole other topic. I mean, saving just in a regular bank account is not even advised. It's really investing, finding those high yield accounts where we can get some compound interest. Like, it's very much in the vein of, okay, I'm going to invest this fund, or these funds, so that they can help me overcome whatever setbacks come. And so sitting down and doing that budget, looking at it strategically, not just with like, yeah, I have this to pay down tomorrow, but like, yeah, 10 years down the line, this is what I need to have. I think that's the way to kind of look at it. That's what I would advise for sure.
I think that's really good advice. There's so much more information in this book. But before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, we didn't get to all 4 of the sections of your book. During the physical and spiritual nourishment section, you talked about that you had given up sugar and that you gave up, pizza, fries, and, this kind of thing. And you've turned more to organic, made from scratch meals, following kind of like the DASH diet, because of hypertension that had ran in your family. Are you still following this kind of like organic home style cooking thing? Do you do that?
I do follow it as much as I can. It's a bit more difficult now because like I'm not living on a home that's like surrounded by farmland with all these organic fruits and vegetables,
Yeah.
which I had on my sabbatical. It was like I could just go outside and pick, my fruits for for whatever meal I was making. But now I still do try to incorporate that in terms of my fruits, in terms of organic eating, in terms of even the DASH diet. It's funny because it's endemic, that DASH diet, to like the Caribbean, and it's there in everything that they don't have to go out of their way to find it. But here, I'm in Canada, and here we do, and so I try my best to incorporate that because that was what helped me. Like a lot of people don't talk about the physical side effects of grief, but that cutting out that sugar and cutting out the refined foods really helped me get back on track physically. And it's something that I think we all need to continue, like myself included. And so I've been doing the best I can at healthy eating. And so yeah, it's something that's become a part of me. And even when I slip up, and because I have kids and they like the pizzas and they like the
Hmm.
chicken nuggets, and it's kind of like, even when I slip up, I'm like, no, I'm not going to be eating like my 8-year-old. I have to, because this is what got me through that period. It
Hmm.
is for certain, that type of living where it was farm to table. And so, yeah, that's something that I still embrace for sure.
I like that you did that. I think it's interesting because I think a lot of times when people go through grief, they don't think about their physical nourishment. They just grab whatever is easy, that they don't have to think about. Or in your case, and the same thing happened to me. And I think, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you. So you can tell me if this is how it was for you. After I experienced grief, my sister passed away very young from cancer. And she passed away within 2 years of my father passing away. So there was a
Oh,
2 year period of time where it was just, well, really more than that, maybe 4 years, where there was just so much grief. And I think I focused more on, okay, I've got to be really healthy. And so that was kind of my mindset. I'm definitely not going to be drinking sodas. I'm definitely not going to be doing fast food. So for me, it wasn't just about, feeding myself, but like, what's the best thing I can put in my body? Is that kind of how you were feeling at that time?
yeah,
Because it
that
seemed
is.
like
And you
it.
know what? As you're talking, and it's great to like talk, this is why it's great to talk things through, because as you were talking, like I'm remembering, and this happens to a lot of people when they're going through grief. I mean, friends and well-wishers will stop by with different food to help. And it's amazing because it got me through that period where I'm planning a funeral and I'm deciding how, what casket to choose and all of that. And people are stopping by with Chinese food and different things, which is great. And I'm eating that. And at the time, I'm not thinking about what I'm putting in my body because I'm on autopilot and I need to get through the funeral and get through different things. And I know for a lot of people who are grieving, and when you're, let's say you're the next of kin to the person who dies, you just need to get through that. And so what helped me was when I stepped back and I thought, okay, I need to think about now how I'm moving forward and how I'm going to nourish myself to get through this. And it was after that period on sabbatical when I thought, yeah, I need to be intentional because I had lost 40 pounds overnight. Like in 2 weeks, I lost 40 pounds after he died. And I remember going into a supermarket, not having the energy to even put like an orange in a bag. My friend had to put things, like things in the shopping cart for me. I couldn't do that. I didn't have enough energy to do that. I was not sleeping well. I had extreme insomnia. And so the physical effects were devastating when you have young kids at home to take care of, and you're alone. And so I had to think about how I was going to build back my body. And that's when I started thinking, no, I can't put anything in. I'm going to have to be very intentional about what I put in now so that I can literally build myself. It was almost like, I talk about the dry bones in the book, but I really felt like that's what I had become. And I really had to feed myself back to back to health. I had to feed myself back to health. And that's what I did. And everything became intentional in terms of my healing. And so, And so, yeah, you bring up a good point that, when you're in the first few weeks to month to couple of months, you might not be thinking about what you're putting in. It might be what's easiest because it's what will get you through, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's what will just feed the hunger and just, and you move on to the tasks that you have to attend to. And so I do appeal to anyone who's listening who is going through that grief or a divorce or some sort of illness, that it's good to think about what you put in, because I know physically how devastating it can be. And sometimes we think, wow, like, I know I'm grieving, but why do I feel like I'm a corpse myself? But this is exactly why. It's because we need that nourishment, that physical nourishment as well, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am not surprised that you were tired and had insomnia. It's bad enough to grieve the loss of someone that meant that much to you, but to have had an 8-week-old baby at the same time, it's almost a insurmountable challenge that you had to go through. And it seems like you do have a lot of resilience, and that you were able to make it through and shine on the other side. And I'm so thankful that you shared your life lessons with us. Is the 40 life lesson article still roaming around the internet still?
It is on Thrive Global still. It's still there. And they actually did. So Medium contacted me when it went viral, and they're like, can we do an audio recording for the article? Because this is one of our best for the year. And so you can listen to the audio as well. It's not by me. They hired somebody to do it. And so it's still there. And I'd be happy if you checked it out, for sure.
Okay. I'll put the link to that in this blog post. So if you're listening, you can check it out at ThatOrganicMom.com. I'll have the link to the book, and I will get the link to the original article. Yes. So people can take a look at that too. Thank you, Keisha, for being with us. I appreciate so much everything that you have done to share this important message with other women.
Thanks for having me. It was great discussing this with you. And I really hope your audience loves the book. And for anyone who wants to visit my website, it's www.KeishaBlair.com. And I'm on social media. My handle is @Keisha Blair for Instagram and Twitter and Facebook. I love getting, messages from readers. So reach out to me. I would absolutely love that, and tell me how your journey is going, in terms of achieving holistic wealth. I'd love to hear that too.
Oh, that's great. So there you go. You can contact her at KeishaBlair.com. So thanks again, Keisha.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Please rate and review so other people can learn about this podcast. Find out more about sleep, hygiene, eating healthy, tasty recipes, zero-waste lifestyle, and lots more on ThatOrganicMom.com. Help us spread the word. Be blessed and stay healthy.